Where the hell have you been? You get home now. My family is starving. Trevor's voice exploded through my phone. Speaker so loud that I had to pull it away from my ear. I was standing in the parking lot of a 24-hour convenience store on the outskirts of Atlanta, December 31st, 9:47 at night, and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone steady. The fluorescent lights from the store cast harsh shadows across the empty parking lot, and a cold wind cut through my coat like it was made of paper. I had been shopping for 3 straight hours, driving from store to store, trying to find every single specific ingredient his mother had demanded for the New Year's Eve feast. I was expected to prepare for his entire family. 3 hours of my life gone, spent searching for a particular brand of hot sauce and a specific type of collard greens that apparently only one store in the entire metropolitan area carried. Welcome to Voices of Untold Stories. I'm sharing my story with you today, and I really hope you'll hit that subscribe button and like this video, because what I'm about to tell you is going to stay with you long after you finish watching. Trust me on that. Now, let me take you back into the moment that changed everything. I stood there in that parking lot listening to Trevor scream at me, calling me names that no husband should ever call his wife. And something inside me just snapped. Not in a loud, dramatic way. It was quiet. It was cold. It was final. I looked at my reflection in the car window at this woman I barely recognized anymore. This exhausted, beaten down version of myself. And I thought, clear as a bell, this will be the last New Year's Eve I spend as his wife. The certainty of it washed over me like a wave. And for the first time in years, I felt something other than fear and anxiety. I felt power. I felt clarity. I felt done. But you need to know how I got here. You need to understand the journey that led me to that parking lot, to that moment, to that decision. Because this didn't happen overnight. This was years in the making. Years of small compromises that became massive losses. Years of red flags I painted green because I wanted so desperately to believe in something that was never real. My name is Camille Bennett, and I was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee, in a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, where people actually sat on their porches in the evening and talked to their neighbors, where community still meant something. My father, Robert Bennett, was an accountant for a mid-sized firm downtown. He was the kind of man who wore the same style of suit every single day, who left the house at 7:15 every morning and came home at 5:45 every evening like clockwork, reliable, steady, boring to some people maybe, but to me he was a rock. My mother, Evelyn Bennett, was a nurse at the regional medical center, working the day shift so she could be home with us kids in the evenings. She was strong, the kind of strong that doesn't need to announce itself. She could work a 12-hour shift, dealing with difficult patients and demanding doctors, then come home and cook dinner and help us with homework without ever complaining once. Not once. I had a younger sister, Simone, and we were close growing up. We fought like all siblings do, but there was love there. Real love, the kind you don't appreciate until you're older, and you realize how rare it actually is. Our house wasn't fancy. It was a modest 3-bedroom brick ranch on a street lined with similar houses. But it was filled with warmth and respect. My father never raised his voice to my mother. Never. I can count on one hand the number of times I heard them argue. And even then it was behind closed doors, quiet, respectful. They showed us what a real partnership looked like, what mutual respect actually meant. My mother had her own bank account. My father asked her opinion on major decisions. They made choices together. 50-50 equal. I grew up thinking that's what marriage was supposed to look like. I grew up thinking that's what I would have. I was a good student, not brilliant, but solid. I excelled in business courses, loved the logic of economics and management theory. I had dreams, real dreams, of someday owning my own corporate training and consulting firm, of being one of those women in a sharp suit walking into a boardroom and commanding respect. After high school, I went to Tennessee State University and got my degree in human resources management. I graduated with honors. Not at the very top of my class, but close enough. I was proud of myself. My parents were proud of me. I was the first person in my immediate family to finish a 4-year degree. After college, I got a job as an HR coordinator at a mid-sized logistics company in Memphis. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. I worked hard, showed up early, stayed late, learned everything I could. Within 3 years, I was promoted to HR manager. By the time I was 28, I was making decent money, had my own apartment, had my own car. I was independent, self-sufficient, proud of what I'd built for myself, but I was also single, very single, and in the South, in a black family, in a community where everyone seemed to be getting married and having babies. Being single at 28 felt like wearing a scarlet letter. My friends from college were all married by then. My cousins were having their second and third babies. Family reunions became torture sessions of when are you going to settle down and you're not getting any younger, baby, and don't wait too long or all the good ones will be gone. My mother, bless her heart, tried to be supportive, but even she would make little comments. I'm not pressuring you, Camille, but I do want grandchildren before I'm too old to enjoy them. My father would just pat my hand and say, the right person will come along when the time is right. But even he looked a little worried sometimes, like maybe I was being too picky, too independent, too focused on my career. By the time I turned 29, I had almost resigned myself to the possibility that maybe I was just meant to be single. Maybe my standards were too high. Maybe I was too set in my ways. Maybe I had missed my window. And I was starting to make peace with that. Starting to think that maybe a successful career and a nice apartment and good friends were enough. That I didn't need a husband to be complete. But there was still that little voice in the back of my head. That little girl who had watched her parents' loving marriage and wanted that for herself. Who wanted to be chosen, to be loved, to build a life with someone. And then Trevor walked into my life like he owned the place. I met him at a corporate networking event when I was 31 years old. It was one of those stuffy evening affairs at a hotel conference center. Lots of business cards and forced small talk and bad wine. I almost didn't go. I was tired from a long week at work and I just wanted to go home, put on my pajamas and watch mindless television. But my boss had encouraged everyone on the management team to attend, to be visible in the business community. So I went, I put on my best professional dress, did my makeup, and showed up. Trevor was working the room like a politician. He was a pharmaceutical sales representative for a major company. And he was good at it. You could tell. He was tall, well-built, with a smile that belonged in a toothpaste commercial and a confidence that bordered on arrogance, but somehow didn't cross the line. He wore an expensive suit, the kind that's clearly tailored, not off the rack. He had a Rolex on his wrist that caught the light every time he gestured, which was often. He talked about his sales numbers, his client relationships, his company car, his expense account. He named restaurants and golf courses and business connections. And he noticed me. I was standing by the refreshment table, checking my phone and mentally calculating how soon I could leave. without being rude when he walked up and introduced himself. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else but here," he said with that megawatt smile. And I laughed because it was true. We started talking and he was charming. God, he was charming. He asked questions about my work, seemed genuinely interested in what I did, complimented my intelligence and my ambition. He was attentive in a way that felt flattering, not creepy. By the end of the night, he had asked for my number and I gave it to him. The courtship was like something out of a romantic movie. He called the very next day, not texted, called. "I don't play games," he said. "I know what I want and I go after it." He took me to expensive restaurants, the kind with cloth napkins and menus without prices. He sent flowers to my office, big elaborate arrangements that made my coworkers whisper and stare. He planned weekend getaways to Nashville, to the Smoky Mountains, to a bed and breakfast in Natchez. He bought me jewelry, not costume stuff, but real pieces with actual price tags that made me uncomfortable. "You deserve beautiful things," he'd say when I protested. "Let me spoil you." He was generous with compliments, always telling me I was beautiful, that I was smart, that I was special, that he'd never met anyone like me. After years of being single, of feeling overlooked and invisible, his attention was intoxicating. I felt seen. I felt valued. I felt like maybe I had finally found what I'd been waiting for. My mother loved him immediately. She met him after we'd been dating for about 2 months. And I could see the relief and approval in her eyes. "He's established, Camille. He's responsible. He has a good job, good benefits. You could build a real life with a man like that." My sister Simone thought he was a bit much, a bit too smooth. But she was young and single herself. So what did she know? My father, though, my father was different. He was polite to Trevor. Shook his hand, made small talk, but I could see something in his eyes. Concern, caution, doubt. One evening, when Trevor was in the bathroom, my father pulled me aside in the kitchen. "Baby girl," he said quietly. "Something feels rehearsed about him, like he's performing a role. Just be careful. Okay? Don't rush into anything. Get to know him. Really know him." I remember feeling a flash of annoyance at my father's words. He was being overprotective, overly cautious-like. Always. Trevor was wonderful. Trevor was everything I'd been looking for. My father just didn't understand modern dating. Didn't understand how different things were now. I dismissed his concerns. I wish I hadn't. God, how I wish I hadn't. 8 months into our relationship, Trevor proposed. He did it with a flash mob in the town square downtown. Dozens of dancers performing to our song while a crowd gathered and people filmed on their phones. It was public. It was grand. It was impossible to say no to, even if I'd wanted to. And I didn't want to. I said yes. I cried. Happy tears. I called my mother immediately. She screamed with joy. My friends congratulated me. Everyone was thrilled. The lonely years were over. I was getting married. I was going to be a wife. We got married 6 months later when I was 32. We had the wedding in Savannah, Georgia, because Trevor had always loved the historic district there. Loved the Spanish moss and the old squares and the romantic atmosphere. It was a beautiful wedding. I'll give it that. I wore a dress that cost more than my first car. White silk with delicate beating that caught the light. Trevor looked sharp in his tuxedo, smiling that brilliant smile, giving a speech at the reception about how I completed him, how he couldn't imagine his future without me, how I was the best thing that had ever happened to him. In the photos, we looked perfect, the perfect couple, the perfect beginning. But even at the wedding, there were signs, small things that I told myself didn't matter, that I was being too sensitive about. Trevor's mother, Diane Bennett, was a presence from the moment she arrived. She was a heavy-set woman in her late 50s with a severe face and eyes that never seemed to smile even when her mouth did. She inspected everything, the venue, the flowers, the catering, my dress, my bridesmaids, my family. Nothing met her standards. The venue was trying too hard to be fancy. The flowers were overpriced for what they are. The food was not nearly as good as what they served at Trevor's cousin's wedding. My bridesmaids' dresses were a bit too revealing for a respectable ceremony. My family was nice enough, I suppose, but quite simple. And then came the toast. When it was time for the groom's parents to speak, Diane stood up, adjusted her dress, and raised her glass. Well, she began, and I should have known from that first word that it wasn't going to be good. Trevor has made his choice. I raised my son to be a strong, successful man, to know his worth, to choose a woman who would support his ambitions and maintain a proper home. Modern women these days forget that a career is nice. But a woman's first priority should always be her family. I hope, Camille, that you remember that. I hope you understand what it means to be a wife in the Bennett family. We have standards. We have expectations. We have a legacy to uphold. She paused, looking directly at me with those cold eyes. Welcome to the family. Let's hope you're up to the challenge. The room fell silent for a moment. One of those awful silences where everyone knows something inappropriate just happened, but no one knows how to respond. A few people coughed nervously. My mother's face went tight, my father's jaw clenched. I felt my face burning with humiliation and anger. But I smiled because what else could I do? It was my wedding day. I wasn't going to cause a scene. I looked at Trevor, expecting him to say something, to defend me, to tell his mother that was inappropriate. But he just chuckled awkwardly and raised his glass. To my mom, always keeping it real, he said. And everyone laughed, relieved to have the tension broken. And the moment passed, but I remembered it. I should have paid more attention to it. After the wedding, I moved into Trevor's place, a rental duplex on the east side of Memphis. It was decent. 2 bedrooms, small backyard, nothing special, but adequate. He had been living there for 3 years. Had it set up exactly how he liked it. I tried to add my touches to make it feel like our home instead of his home that I was just occupying, but he resisted. I like it the way it is, he'd say when I suggested moving furniture or changing the curtains or painting an accent wall. Why do we need to change things that aren't broken? So, I didn't push. I told myself it didn't matter. It was just a rental. Anyway, we'd buy our own place soon, and then I could decorate however I wanted. The first few months of marriage were happy. Or at least I thought they were happy. Maybe I was just so relieved to finally be married, to have checked that box, to no longer be the single one at family gatherings that I convinced myself I was happy. Trevor would come home from work and I'd have dinner ready. We'd eat together, watch television, talk about our days. On weekends, we'd run errands, visit his mother, have friends over for dinner. Parties. It felt normal. It felt like what married life was supposed to be. But gradually, so gradually, I didn't notice it happening. Things began to shift. Little comments started appearing. In our conversations, like poison dripped slowly into a glass of water. "You're wearing that to dinner with my colleagues?" he asked one evening when I came out of the bedroom in a dress I'd worn a dozen times before. "I mean, it's fine, I guess. Just thought you'd want to make a better impression." "Or, do you really need to see your college friends this weekend? We just saw them last month. Don't you think you're being a bit obsessive about maintaining those relationships? We're married now, your priority should be us." I made excuses for him. He was under stress at work. His company was restructuring and there was pressure to hit higher sales targets. He was worried about money. He was adjusting to married life. Everyone said the first year of marriage was hard, right? This was just normal adjustment period stuff. It would get better. It had to get better. So, I smiled and changed my dress and cancelled plans with my friends and told myself I was being a good wife, a supportive partner, someone who understood compromise. Then came the inheritance and everything changed. My mother's older sister, my Aunt Helen, died suddenly when I was 33. She was only 58 years old, seemingly healthy, active, vibrant. And then one day, an aneurysm. She was gone before the ambulance even arrived. The shock of it rippled through our entire family. Aunt Helen had never married, never had children. She had devoted her life to her career as a bank executive and to accumulating assets. She was smart with money, invested well, owned property. And when her will was read, I discovered she had left me something extraordinary. Her townhouse. It was a beautiful 3-bedroom, 2 and 1/2 bath townhouse in a desirable suburb of Atlanta, about a 40-minute drive from the heart of the city. She had bought it 15 years earlier, paid it off completely, maintained it immaculately. It had hardwood floors, granite countertops, a 2-car garage, a small backyard. The real estate agent who appraised it valued it at $385,000. $385,000. Fully paid off in my name only. My aunt had specified in her will that the property was to go to me, Camille Bennett, not to me and my husband, but to me specifically. She had been very clear about that. When I told Trevor about the inheritance, I watched his eyes light up in a way I'd never seen before. Not with happiness for me, not with sympathy for my loss, but with something else. Greed, calculation, opportunity. "A townhouse in Atlanta," he said slowly, and I could practically see the wheels turning in his head. "Worth almost $400,000. Paid off completely." He pulled me into a hug that felt performative. "Baby, this is amazing. This changes everything. We can sell it, combine the money with my savings, and buy that dream house I've been looking at in the suburbs. You know, the one with the pool and the big backyard. This is exactly the opportunity we needed." Something in my gut clenched. "Trevor," I said carefully, "I don't want to sell it. It was my aunt's home. It's a piece of my family history. I thought we could move in, live there. It's bigger than this duplex. It's in a better area. It's actually ours instead of a rental." His face changed. The smile disappeared. His eyes went hard. "Moved to Atlanta? Are you serious? My job is here. My family is here. My entire life is here. And you want to uproot everything for a house? Your company has offices in Atlanta?" I pointed out you could transfer and it's not that far from Memphis. We could visit your family regularly. This is an incredible opportunity, Trevor. A fully paid off home. Do you know how rare that is? We wouldn't have a mortgage. We could save money, build equity, actually start building wealth instead of throwing money away on rent. We argued about it for weeks. He tried every angle. He tried logic. His job was too important to risk transferring. He tried emotion. He couldn't leave his mother who was getting older and needed him. He tried guilt. I was being selfish. Thinking only of myself, not considering his needs or his career. He tried manipulation. If I loved him, I would understand why selling was the smart choice. But for the first time in our marriage, I held firm. That townhouse was mine. My aunt had left it specifically to me, and I was not going to sell it just so Trevor could buy his dream house with a pool. Finally, he backed down. Sort of. Fine, he said with barely concealed resentment. We'll move to your precious townhouse, but I'm telling you right now, I'm not happy about this. I'm making a huge sacrifice for you, and I hope you remember that. His tone made it clear I'd be paying for this decision for a long time, but I didn't care. I had won. For the first time since we'd gotten married, I had stood my ground and won. We moved to the Atlanta suburb. 3 months later, right after I had secured a transfer to a corporate position at a company there. Trevor eventually requested and received a transfer to his company's Atlanta office, though he complained about it constantly. The townhouse was everything I remembered from visiting my aunt. Warm, welcoming, full of potential. I loved it immediately. It felt like home in a way the duplex never had. But Trevor resented it from day one. He walked through the rooms with his lips pressed tight, criticizing everything. The kitchen was outdated. The master bathroom needs a complete renovation. The backyard was too small. The neighborhood was too quiet. But most of all, he resented that it was mine. The deed had my name on it, only my name. Aunt Helen had been very specific about that, and her lawyer had made sure the property transferred as my sole and separate property, not marital property. Trevor had no legal claim to it, and it ate at him. I could see it in the way he talked about the place, always referring to it as your house or the townhouse. Never our home or the house. The first year in Atlanta was brutal. Trevor's resentment poisoned everything. He came home later and later from work, always with an excuse. Client dinner, team drinks, overtime on a big project. He started drinking more, not enough to be falling down drunk, but enough that I could smell it on him most nights. His criticism intensified. My cooking was bland. My housekeeping was sloppy. My appearance was letting itself go. Nothing I did was good enough. Nothing I said was right. I felt like I was walking on eggshells in my own home. Constantly trying to anticipate his mood, constantly trying to prevent the next explosion. And then his mother started visiting. Diane had not been happy about our move to Atlanta. She saw it as me stealing her son away from her. Putting distance between them, prioritizing my family over hers. She made this very clear in every phone conversation, every holiday visit, every interaction. I barely see my son anymore, she'd say pointedly. Ever since he married you and moved to that house. I hardly hear from him. Never mind that Atlanta was only a 6-hour drive from Memphis. Never mind that Trevor called her 3 times a week. Never mind that we drove to Memphis at least once a month. It was never enough. And then she started showing up unannounced. Trevor had given her a spare key to the townhouse without asking me, without even telling me. I'd come home from work and find her sitting in my living room, suitcase by the door, having let herself In surprise, she'd say with a smile that never reached her eyes. I thought I'd come visit my son for a few days. You don't mind, do you? What was I supposed to say? No, you can't stay in my house. She'd have called me disrespectful, ungrateful, a terrible daughter-in-law. Trevor would have taken her side. So, I smiled and said, of course, she was welcome. And I spent the next 3 or 4 days being criticized in my own home. Diane had an opinion about everything, and she shared every single one of them. The house was dusty. The refrigerator was too empty. The towels were too cheap. The furniture arrangement was wrong. My cooking needed more seasoning. My work schedule kept me away from home too much. My clothes were too professional, not feminine enough. I was too focused on my career and not focused enough on taking care of my husband. A good wife, she informed me repeatedly, made her husband her priority. A good wife kept the house immaculate. A good wife always had a home-cooked meal ready. A good wife didn't work such long hours that her husband had to fend for himself. And Trevor said nothing. He would sit there while his mother criticized me, my home, my choices, and he would say nothing. Sometimes he'd even agree with her. Mom has a point. Camille, you have been working a lot lately. Maybe you should think about cutting back your hours. Or, she's right. This place could use a deep clean. When was the last time you scrubbed the baseboards? He never defended me. Not once. Not ever. I tried to talk to him about it multiple times. Trevor, your mother's visits are becoming a problem. She shows up without warning, criticizes everything I do, and you just sit there. Can you please talk to her? Can you please set some boundaries? But he'd get defensive immediately. That's my mother you're talking about. She raised me. She sacrificed everything for me. If she wants to visit her son in his home, she has every right to do that. His home. Not our home. His. The visits became more frequent. Once a month became twice. A month became every other week. And it wasn't just Diane. Trevor's younger sister Shanice started coming too, along with her husband Andre and their 3 kids, boys aged 5, 7, and 9. They treated my townhouse like a hotel. They'd show up, take over the place, leave messes everywhere, raid my refrigerator, use all my towels, and expect me to cook for them and clean up after them. The kids were undisciplined terrors who jumped on my furniture, broke my things, and screamed at all hours. When I'd gently suggest they calm down or be more careful, Shanice would give me a look like I'd suggested drowning puppies. They're just kids, she'd say. You don't understand because you don't have any of your own. That comment stung more than she knew. Trevor and I had been trying for a baby for over a year with no success. I had gone to a fertility specialist and discovered I had some reproductive health issues. Nothing impossible to overcome, but it would require treatment, time, and patience. When I told Trevor, he didn't hug me or comfort me or tell me we'd figure it out together. He just looked disappointed, frustrated, annoyed. Of course, he muttered. Of course. Something else has to be difficult, like it was my fault, like I had chosen to have health problems just to inconvenience him. We stopped trying after that, or rather, he stopped being interested. Our physical relationship, which had never been particularly passionate even in the beginning, dwindled to almost nothing. He'd come to bed late, fall asleep immediately, leave early in the morning. We became roommates who happened to be married. And I was lonely. God, I was so lonely. Lonely in my own home, in my own marriage, in my own life. I threw myself into work. It was the only place I felt competent, valued, appreciated. I was good at my job. Really good that I understood people, understood organizational dynamics, knew how to mediate conflicts and solve problems. My managers noticed. I got a promotion to senior HR generalist, then to HR manager, then to senior HR manager. By the time I was 36, I was making $78,000 a year leading a team of 4 people. Managing recruitment and employee relations for a company of over 500 employees. I was successful. I was respected. I was valued at work anyway. At home, my success was treated as a problem. You're never here. Trevor would complain. You care more about your job than your marriage. You're becoming one of those career women who forgets what's actually important. Diane was even more blunt. A woman who works too much, neglects her home and her husband. She announced during one of her visits. In my day, women understood that their family came first. But your generation, you all want to have it all and you end up doing nothing well. I suggested couples therapy once. We were having dinner, one of those silent, tense dinners where we sat across from each other like strangers. And I finally said, Trevor, I think we should see a counselor, someone who can help us communicate better, work through our issues. Our marriage is struggling and I think professional help could. He laughed. Actually laughed. This bitter mocking sound. A therapist. Are you serious? There's nothing wrong with me, Camille. You're the one with the problem. You're the one who can't balance work and home. You're the one who doesn't know how to be a wife. You're the one who moved us away from my family. You're the problem, not me. Maybe you should go to therapy and figure out what's wrong with you. That was the moment I realized he would never change. He would never see me as an equal partner. He would never value my needs or my feelings. He would never be the man I needed him to be because he had never been that man. I had just been too desperate, too lonely, too hopeful to see it. But I still stayed because I was scared. Scared of being single. Again. Scared of being a failure at marriage. Scared of what people would say. Scared of disappointing my parents, who had been so happy when I finally got married. Scared of being alone. So I stayed and I endured. And I made myself smaller and smaller trying to fit into the shape Trevor and his family wanted me to be. And then my father died. And everything shifted again. I was 35 when I got the call. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 2:30, and I was in a meeting when my phone started vibrating insistently. I ignored it the first time. Then it rang again and again. Finally, I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. It was my mother and I could barely understand her through the sobbing. Camille, baby, you need to come home. It's your father. He had a stroke. A massive stroke. They're saying there's nothing they can do. You need to come home right now. I drove to Memphis in a day. My hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. I called Trevor from the road, told him what had happened, expected him to say he'd meet me there or he'd leave work early and follow me. Instead, he said, I'm sorry, baby, but I have a huge client presentation tomorrow. It's been scheduled for weeks. I can't miss it. This account is worth 6 figures, but I'll come up this weekend. Okay, I promise. His father-in-law was dying and He had a presentation. A presentation. My father died 48 hours later without ever regaining consciousness. I was there holding his hand, telling him I loved him, thanking him for everything he'd given me. My mother was on his other side crying silently. My sister, Simone, was there looking lost and young despite being a grown woman. Trevor never came. Not to the hospital, not to the funeral. He called the morning of the funeral and said, "The presentation went really well, by the way. I think we're going to land this account, but listen, I'm swamped with follow-up work. I just can't get away. I'm sorry. Tell your family I'm thinking of them." I stood at my father's funeral listening to people talk about what a good man he had been, how he'd loved his family, how he'd lived with integrity and kindness. And I thought about my own marriage, about the man I had chosen, about how disappointed my father would be if he knew how unhappy I was, about the conversation we'd had before the wedding when he'd expressed his concerns about Trevor. He had been right. He had seen something I refused to see. And now he was gone. And I couldn't even tell him I was sorry for not listening. After the funeral, after everyone had left, my mother took my hand and we sat together in her living room in the house where I'd grown up. She looked so small suddenly, so fragile. The loss of my father had diminished her somehow. "Baby," she said softly, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me. Life is too short to be unhappy. I loved your father for 38 years. And every single one of those years was a gift. We had a true partnership. We respected each other. We supported each other. We lifted each other up." She paused, looking at me with eyes that saw too much. "I don't think you have that with Trevor." "Mom," I started, but she held up her hand. "I'm not blind, Camille. I see how he treats you. I see how you've changed since you married him. You're dimmer somehow, quieter, smaller. That's not what marriage should do to a person. Marriage should make you bigger, not smaller." She squeezed my hand. "I won't be here forever. I need to know that when I'm gone, you'll be okay, that you'll be happy. Promise me. Promise me. You won't waste your life being unhappy just because you're afraid of what people will think. Your father and I, we didn't raise you to settle. We raised you to know your worth." I promised her even though I didn't know if I could keep that promise, but I held on to her words. I held on to them tight. 6 months after my father died, my mother was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. Stage 3, aggressive. The doctors gave her 2 years, maybe 3, with treatment. My world imploded again. I became her primary caregiver, driving to Memphis every weekend, coordinating her care, making sure she got to appointments, staying with her through the worst of the chemotherapy side effects. Trevor complained constantly. "You're never home anymore. You're always running off to Memphis. Your mother has other family. Why does it always have to be you?" "Because she's my mother," I said, exhausted and angry. "Because she's dying. Because she raised me and loved me and sacrificed for me and now she needs me. So yes, it has to be me." He rolled his eyes. "Always so dramatic. She's not even that sick. She's going to be fine." She wasn't fine. She lived for 18 months after her diagnosis. And they were brutal months. I watched this strong, vibrant woman waste away. Watched the cancer steal her piece by piece. I sat with her through the nausea and the hair loss and the pain and the fear. Trevor came to visit her exactly twice in those 18 months. Twice. And Both times he spent the whole visit looking at his phone and making excuses to leave early. Near the end, when she was in hospice and we all knew it was just a matter of days, she called me to her bedside. "Camille," she whispered. Her voice so weak, I had to lean close to hear her. "Do you remember what you promised me after your father died?" "Yes. Mama. I need you to keep that promise. I need you to choose yourself this time. Choose happiness. Choose peace. Choose life. Don't stay in something that's killing you slowly just because you're afraid. Be brave, baby. Be brave for both of us." She died 3 days later with all of us around her. I held her hand as she took her last breath, and I felt something inside me break and also strangely solidify. My last parent was gone. I was truly alone now. No safety net. No one to fall back on, just me. And somehow that realization was both terrifying and liberating. My mother left me her retirement savings, $127,000 that she'd carefully accumulated over decades of working and saving. She had been smart with money, conservative, but strategic. That money, combined with the equity in her house, which my sister Simone and I split, gave me resources I'd never had before. Resources that meant options. Resources that meant power. Trevor's reaction to my inheritance was immediate and predictable. "You should invest that money," he said. "Put it in our joint savings account. We could use it as a down payment on a real house, something bigger, something better than this townhouse. This is our chance to upgrade our joint savings account that only he ever contributed to and which he controlled completely, our chance to upgrade from the townhouse that was solely in my name to a house that would be jointly owned." I looked at him and saw the calculation in his eyes. He wanted access to my money. He wanted control of my assets. He wanted to tie me to him financially so I couldn't leave even if I wanted to. "No," I said simply. "No." "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, no. That money is mine. My mother left it to me. I'm putting it in my own account." His face went red. "Your own account? We're married. We're supposed to share everything. You're being incredibly selfish right now. You know that?" "Am I?" I asked. And I was surprised by how calm I sounded. "Because I seem to remember you have your own account that I don't have access to. I seem to remember you spending your money however you want without consulting me. So why is it selfish when I do the same thing?" We fought about it for weeks, but I didn't budge. I opened a separate bank account at a different bank and deposited every penny of my inheritance. I also started depositing a portion of each paycheck into that account. I told Trevor it was for emergency savings. And he was so convinced of his own superiority and my ultimate submission that he didn't question it too much. He assumed I'd eventually cave, that I'd eventually hand over access to my money. Like a good wife should. But I wasn't planning to be a good wife anymore. I was planning to be a free woman. I started researching late at night after Trevor had gone to bed. I'd sit at my laptop in the guest bedroom and learn everything I could about divorce in Georgia. The laws, the procedures, the timelines, what happened to separate property versus marital property, how alimony worked, how asset division worked. I learned that my townhouse, because it had been inherited before the marriage and was in my name only, would remain my separate property. I learned that my inheritance from my mother would also be considered separate property. I learned that I had more power in this marriage than I had realized. I also started documenting every instance of verbal abuse. I wrote down in a private journal I kept in my locked desk drawer at work. The dates, the times, what was said, when Trevor was particularly cruel, when he called me names or belittled me. I started recording some of our arguments on my phone. Not to use against him necessarily, but just to have proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that this was really happening. Proof that I had legitimate reasons for leaving. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I reached out to my old friends, the ones I'd lost touch with after I got married, because Trevor had made it so difficult to maintain those friendships. I called my college roommate, Kesha, who had moved to Atlanta years ago and whom I'd barely talked to in the last 5 years. "Girl," she said when she heard my voice, "I was starting to think you'd fallen off the face of the earth. Where have you been?" "In a prison of my own making," I said. And then I started crying. And for the first time in years, I told someone the truth. All of it. Everything. And she listened. She didn't judge. She didn't tell me I was overreacting or being too sensitive. She just listened and then said, "Camille, you need to leave him. You know that, right? You need to get out." "I know," I whispered. "I'm working on it." "Don't just work on it," she said fiercely. "Do it. Life is too short to waste on men who don't deserve you." At work, things were getting better. Even as things at home got worse, my manager retired and the company promoted me to senior HR director, a significant jump in both responsibility and salary. I was now making $95,000 a year, overseeing all HR functions for the entire organization. Managing a team of 6 people, reporting directly to the chief operating officer. It was a dream job, the kind of position I'd always aspired to. I was good at it. I was respected. I had authority and influence. Trevor tried to convince me to turn down the promotion. "You're already working too much," he said. "This is just going to make it worse. You're never going to be home. What kind of marriage is this? A wife should be available to her husband, should be there when he needs her, but you're always at work, always focused on your career. It's selfish." For years, I would have listened to him. I would have felt guilty. I might have even turned down the opportunity. But not this time. This time I looked at him and said, "I'm taking the job. This is my career. This is important to me. If you can't support that, that's your problem, not mine." The look on his face was almost comical. Shock, disbelief, rage. No one talked to Trevor like that. Certainly not his wife. "You've changed," he said. And it sounded like an accusation. Yes, I agreed. "I have." He tried to punish me for my defiance. He stayed out later. He drank more. He was cruel in his criticisms. But the funny thing was, I didn't care anymore. I had built a wall around my heart, brick by brick, insult by insult, and now nothing he said could really hurt me. I was numb to him. I was done, but I wasn't ready to leave yet. Not quite. I needed to save more money. I needed to be absolutely certain I had everything lined up perfectly. I needed to wait for the right moment. So, I kept playing the role of wife, going through the motions, biding my time, preparing for my escape. And then came the holidays, and everything came to a head. It started on December 26th, the day after Christmas. We had spent Christmas Day in Memphis with Trevor's family. A miserable experience as always. Diane had criticized everything from the gifts I'd chosen to the dress I'd worn to the fact that I'd had a second glass of wine with dinner. A lady knows her limits, she'd said pointedly. Shanice's children had destroyed the living room, and when I'd asked them to be more careful around the antique decorations, Shanice had snapped at me. They're just kids. Maybe if you had some of your own, you'd understand. Trevor had said nothing. He never said anything. We drove back to Atlanta that evening, and the next morning, Trevor announced, I invited everyone over for New Year's Eve. My mom, Shanice, and Andre, and the boys. Maybe my cousin Troy and his wife, too, if they can make it. It'll be nice to have the family together. I stared at him. You invited your whole family to our house for New Year's Eve without asking me? Why would I need to ask? They're my family. This is my house. I can invite whoever I want. This is my house, actually. And yes, you do need to ask before inviting a crowd of people and expecting me to host them. His eyes narrowed. Don't start with that. My house again. We're married. What's yours is mine, and my family is coming for New Year's whether you like it or not. So, you need to get ready. My mom wants a traditional Southern New Year's spread. Black-eyed peas, collard greens, cornbread, ham, sweet potato pie, the whole thing. She's going to send you the menu. Trevor, I work until 3 on New Year's Eve. We have a half day at the office, but I still have meetings and end-of-year reports to finalize. I don't have time to cook a massive feast. Then make time, he said coldly. This is important to my family. This is important to me. Or is your precious job more important than your family obligations? I wanted to scream. That his family wasn't my family, that they treated me like garbage, that I'd rather spend New Year's Eve alone in an empty house than with Diane and her criticisms and Shanice's bratty kids. But I didn't. I just nodded and said I'd figure it out because I knew this was going to be the last time. I knew I wasn't going to cook that feast. I knew I wasn't going to play host to people who despised me. I knew everything was about to change. Diane called me the next day with the menu. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a request. It was a command. She listed off 30 different dishes from appetizers to desserts with specific brands and preparations and side dishes. When I tried to say that maybe we could simplify that 30 dishes for 8 people seemed excessive, she cut me off. This is how the Bennett family celebrates New Year's. We have standards. We have traditions. If you can't handle it, maybe Trevor should have married someone more capable. I spent the next 3 days shopping and prepping and cooking while also working full days at the office. I was exhausted. I was running on coffee and rage. Trevor didn't help. Not once. He sat on the couch, watched football, drank beer, and occasionally yelled from the living room to ask when dinner would be ready or to complain that I'd forgotten to pick up his dry cleaning. On December 30th, Diane and the family arrived, a full day early. I was at work when they showed up, using the key Trevor had given them without telling me. I came home at 6:30 to find them settled in my living room like they owned the place. Diane was in my kitchen going through my refrigerator and making disapproving noises. Is this all you've prepared? We're eating tomorrow night. You should be much further along than this. Shanice's kids were jumping on my furniture. Andre was passed out on my couch. Shanice was scrolling through her phone, ignoring her children as they destroyed my house. Trevor was sitting in my favorite chair, looking pleased that his family had arrived. Camille, Diane called out. Come here. We need to discuss the menu. You're missing several key items, and I need you to go back to the store first thing in the morning. I stood in the doorway of my own home, looking at these people who had invaded my space, my sanctuary, my peace, and something inside me went very still, very cold, very clear. I need to run out for a bit, I said calmly. I forgot something at the office. I got back in my car and drove. Not to the office, just drove. I ended up parked by a lake, sitting in the darkness, listening to the silence. I pulled out my phone and called Kesha. I'm doing it, I said when she answered. Tomorrow night, I'm done. I'm ending this. About damn time, she said. Do you need me there? Do you need help? No, I said. I need to do this myself. But thank you. Thank you for being my friend even when I disappeared. Thank you for not giving up on me. Never, she said fiercely. You call me when it's done, okay? You call me and I'm bringing champagne and we're celebrating your freedom. I sat by that lake for 2 more hours, gathering my strength, making my plan. Then I drove home, walked into my house full of people I didn't want there and went straight to bed without speaking to anyone. New Year's Eve morning, I woke up early. Trevor was snoring beside me. I looked at him. This man I'd been married to for 7 years. This man who had made me so unhappy for so long, and felt nothing. No love, no hate, just nothing. I got up, got ready for work, and left. At the office, I could barely focus. I kept watching the clock. 3 o'clock. Couldn't come fast enough. When I finally left, I sat in my car in the parking lot for a few minutes, breathing deeply, centering myself. Then I drove to the grocery store to get the remaining items on Diane's list. Not because I was planning to cook them, but because I needed Trevor to think everything was normal. I needed him off guard. The store was chaos. New Year's Eve crowds. Everyone frantically grabbing last-minute supplies. I methodically worked through the list, filling 2 carts with food I had no intention of preparing. The whole time I was calm, eerily calm. I knew what I was going to do. I knew exactly how this night was going to end. I was standing in the checkout line. Carts full of groceries. When my phone rang, Trevor. I knew before I answered that he was going to be angry. It was after 9. They'd been expecting me hours ago. I answered the phone and I listened to him scream at me. Listened to him call me a lazy, a worthless excuse for a wife. Listened to him tell me his family was starving, that I was an embarrassment, that I had better get home immediately and start cooking. Listened to every vile word, and I smiled. Because I was done. Finally, completely, irrevocably done. I paid for the groceries, loaded them into my car, and drove home. Not rushed, not hurried. I took my time. Let them wait. Let them stew. Let them get angrier and more entitled. It would make what was about to happen even more satisfying. I pulled into my driveway at 10:23. I could see lights on in every room of my townhouse. I could hear noise even from outside, the sound of people who had made themselves comfortable in someone else's home. I sat in my car for a moment, looking at the house my aunt had left me, the house that had been my refuge, now invaded by people who had never respected me. I left the groceries in the trunk. All of them. Every single bag. Then I walked to my front door, unlocked it, and stepped inside. The scene that greeted me was exactly what I expected. Diane was holding court in my living room, sitting in my reading chair like it was a throne. Trevor was sprawled on my couch, feet up on my coffee table, beer in hand. Shanice and Andre were at my dining table, scrolling through their phones. The three boys were running wild, screaming and jumping, and knocking things over. One of them had already broken a porcelain figurine I'd bought in Savannah. A piece that had meaning to me. The shards were still on the floor. No one had cleaned them up. No one had apologized. Well, finally, Diane said, not even looking up at me. We were beginning to think you'd decided not to come home at all. Where have you been? Where's all the food? We're absolutely starving here, and you're just gallivanting around town like you don't have responsibilities. Trevor stood up and I could see he'd been drinking. His eyes were slightly unfocused, his movements a bit loose. Yeah, Camille, where the hell have you been? And where are the groceries? Don't tell me you forgot something. My mother has been here all day waiting to help you cook, and you haven't even brought the ingredients home yet. I stood in my entryway looking at all of them. These people who thought they had the right to be in my home, to use my things, to demand my labor, to insult me. I felt that same icy calm I'd felt in the parking lot. The groceries are in the car, I said evenly. Well, go get them, Trevor barked. What are you waiting for? We need to start cooking or we're never going to eat tonight. No, I said. The room went quiet. Trevor's face scrunched up in confusion. What did you just say? I said, no, I'm not getting the groceries. I'm not cooking dinner. I'm not doing any of it. Diane stood up, her face flushing with anger. Excuse me? What kind of attitude is this? Trevor, your wife is being incredibly disrespectful right now. I turned to look at her. This woman who had made my life miserable for 7 years, who had criticized and belittled and undermined me at every opportunity. Disrespectful, I said, and my voice was like ice. You want to talk about disrespect? You've disrespected me from the moment I married your son. You've insulted me, criticized me, treated me like hired help in my own home. You've showed up unannounced, used a key you were never given permission to have, and made yourself comfortable in a house that doesn't belong to you. How dare you, Diane started. But I cut her off. No, you don't get to talk right now. I'm talking for the first time in 7 years. I'm going to say exactly what I think and all of you are going to listen. I looked around the room, making eye contact with each of them. This is my house, my townhouse. My aunt left it to me, specifically to me, not to Trevor, not to this family. The deed has my name on it and only my name. And I want all of you out now. The silence that followed was deafening. Trevor was staring at me like I'd started speaking in tongues. Shanice's mouth had fallen open. Andre had actually looked up from his phone. The kids had stopped running and Diane looked like I had slapped her. You've lost your mind, Trevor finally said. You've actually lost your damn mind. No, Trevor. I found it. For the first time in years, I know exactly what I'm doing. I want your family out of my house in the next hour. And then I want you out, too, because I'm filing for divorce. The word hung in the air like a bomb. Divorce. I'd finally said it out loud. Divorce. Trevor's voice cracked. You can't be serious. It's New Year's Eve. You're just tired. You're stressed. Let's talk about this tomorrow. There's nothing to talk about. I'm done, Trevor. This marriage is over. It's been over for a long time. I just didn't have the courage to admit it until now. Diane found her voice, shrill and furious. Trevor, are you going to let her talk to us like this? Are you going to let her throw your family out on the street on New Year's Eve? What kind of man are you? His name is Trevor, Diane, and he's the kind of man who stands by while his mother abuses his wife. He's the kind of man who criticizes and controls and demeans. He's the kind of man who called me a slut on the phone 2 hours ago because I wasn't home fast enough to cook for people I never invited. He's the kind of man I'm divorcing. Trevor stepped toward me, and for a second I saw something dangerous in his eyes. You can't do this. This is my home, too. You can't just kick me out. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and held it up. Actually, I can. This townhouse is my separate property, legally documented and protected. You have no claim to it. And if you don't leave voluntarily, I'll call the police and they'll remove you. Don't test me on this, Trevor. I've been preparing for this moment for months. I know my rights. I know the law, and I'm done playing the submissive wife. Shanice stood up, trying to grab her kids, who were standing frozen, finally sensing that something serious was happening. This is insane. Where are we supposed to go? It's New Year's Eve. Everything is booked. That's not my problem, Shanice. You showed up at my house uninvited. You treated my home like a hotel. Your children broke my things, and you didn't even apologize. You've been nothing but rude and entitled and dismissive of me for years. I owe you nothing. Andre, who had barely spoken 2 words to me in all the years I'd known him, suddenly piped up. You're a real piece of work. You know that? Doing this on a holiday? What kind of person does that? I laughed, and it wasn't a nice sound. The kind of person who's been pushed too far. The kind of person who's been taken advantage of for too long. The kind of person who finally remembered she has a spine. You're going to regret this, Diane said, her voice shaking with rage. And maybe something else. Fear. You're going to end up alone. No man will ever want you. You're too difficult, too independent, too selfish. My son is the best thing that ever happened to you, and you're throwing it all away because you're too immature to appreciate what you have. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something like pity. Diane, your son verbally abuses me. He dismisses my career, controls my social life, refuses to defend me when you attack me, and treats me like a servant instead of a partner. If that's the best thing that ever happened to me, then I've had a pretty terrible life. But it's not, and I'm done accepting it. I turned back to Trevor. You have 1 hour to pack a bag with essentials. You can come back after the holiday to get the rest of your things, but you need to call first. If you refuse to leave, I'm calling 911. Your choice. His face was bright red, his hands clenched into fists. For a moment, I thought he might actually hit me. And I prepared to run, to scream, to do whatever I needed to do. But something in my eyes must have warned him off because he didn't move. Instead, he said, his voice low and mean, "You're going to pay for this. You think you're so smart, so independent, but you need me. You'll realize that when you're alone and miserable and begging me to take you back." I won't, I said simply. I'd rather be alone for the rest of my life than spend one more day married to you. The next 45 minutes were chaos. Diane wailed and cried, calling me every name she could think of. Shanice ranted about my selfishness and cruelty. The kids cried because the adults were upset. Andre muttered about crazy women under his breath. And Trevor moved through the house like a zombie, throwing things into a duffel bag, still not quite believing this was really happening. He tried a few more times to talk to me, to convince me to change my mind. Camille, please, let's just calm down and talk about this. We can work through this. I'll change. I'll be better. Just don't do this. But his words were empty. He didn't mean them. And even if he had, it was too late. Years too late. At 11:17, they finally left. All of them with their bags and their wounded pride and their anger. Trevor was the last one out the door. He stood on the threshold, looking back at me one more time. You're making a huge mistake, he said. No, I replied. Marrying you was the mistake. This is me correcting it. I closed the door, locked it, put the chain on, and then I stood there in the sudden silence of my empty home, and I started to shake. My legs gave out, and I sank to the floor right there in the entryway, my back against the wall, and I cried. I cried for hours, for all the years I'd wasted. For the woman I'd been when I married him, and the beaten-down shell I'd become. For my parents who weren't here to see me finally choose myself. For the life I could have had if I'd been braver sooner. But underneath the grief, there was something else. Relief. Sweet, overwhelming, almost painful relief. They were gone. He was gone. I was alone in my house, my space, my sanctuary, and I was free. When the tears finally stopped, I stood up, washed my face, and looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. My eyes were red and swollen. My face was blotchy, but there was something else there, too. A light I hadn't seen in years. Strength. Hope, life. I walked through my townhouse, room by room, touching my walls, my furniture, my things. Mine. All mine. No one to criticize, no one to demand, no one to diminish, just me. I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion and poured myself a glass. Then I stood at my back patio door, looking out at my small backyard, and waited. At 11:59, I could hear the sounds of celebration starting, people cheering, fireworks beginning to pop, the countdown to midnight happening in homes all around me. I raised my glass to the dark sky. Happy New Year, Mom, I whispered. Happy New Year, Dad. I did it. I kept my promise. I chose myself. The fireworks exploded in brilliant colors against the black sky. Neighbors shouted and celebrated. Music played from somewhere nearby. The world rang in the new year with joy and hope and anticipation. And I stood in my own home. Finally, truly, completely free, and I smiled. The first day of the new year. I slept until noon. I woke up in my own bed in my own house, alone. And for the first time in 7 years, I felt peace. I ordered Chinese takeout for dinner and ate it straight out of the containers while watching a movie Trevor had always refused to watch. I wore my rattiest pajamas. I didn't do my hair or put on makeup. I did absolutely nothing productive, and it was glorious. Trevor tried calling multiple times. I didn't answer. He left voicemails that progressed from apologetic to angry to desperate to threatening. I deleted all of them without listening to more than a few seconds. I blocked his number. Then I blocked Diane's number. Then Shanice's. I wanted no connection to that family whatsoever. On January 3rd, I met with a lawyer that Kesha had recommended. She was a woman in her 50s who specialized in divorce cases, and she listened to my story with a completely neutral expression. When I finished, she said, "You have an airtight case. The townhouse is your separate property, inherited before the marriage and never commingled with marital funds. Your inheritance from your mother is also separate. He has no claim to any of it. We'll file for divorce on the grounds of irreconcilable differences. Given that you have no children and separate property, this should be straightforward." "What if he fights it?" I asked. "He's vindictive. I can see him trying to drag this out just to hurt me." She smiled, and it wasn't warm. "Let him try. I've been doing this for 25 years. I've seen every tactic. He can fight all he wants, but he won't win. The law is on your side. And more importantly, the facts are on your side. He'll spend a lot of money on legal fees just to end up with nothing." She was right. Trevor hired a lawyer and tried to contest the divorce. He claimed he'd contributed to maintaining the townhouse and therefore had a right to partial ownership. He claimed my inheritance should be considered marital property. He claimed I owed him spousal support because he'd sacrificed his career by moving to Atlanta for me. Every single claim was demolished by the facts. Bank records showed I'd paid 90% of all household expenses. The deed and my aunt's will clearly established the townhouse as my separate property. His salary had actually increased after the move, not decreased. His lawyer, after reviewing everything, advised him to settle, to cut his losses and walk away. By the end of February, less than 2 months after I'd kicked him out, the divorce was finalized. No kids, clean separation. He got whatever belongings were clearly his. I got the townhouse, my inheritance, my retirement accounts, and my freedom. I kept my maiden name. I had never actually changed it to Bennett, something that had annoyed Diane to no end. Now I was glad. Trevor tried one last manipulation tactic before the final papers were signed. He called from a number I hadn't blocked yet, and when I foolishly answered, he said, "Camille, please. I know I wasn't the best husband. I know I made mistakes, but don't you think we owe it to what we had to try? Don't you think 7 years means something?" "You're right," I said. 7 years does mean something. It means 7 years of my life that I'll never get back. 7 years of being diminished and controlled and insulted. 7 years of losing myself, but it's over now. And I'm never looking back. I hung up and blocked that number, too. For a while, Diane tried to reach out through other people, mutual acquaintances, distant family connections. She sent a letter to my workplace, which was intercepted by security. The letter was full of rage and bitterness, calling me a gold digger and a slut and a homewrecker, as if I had destroyed my own marriage. I filed a harassment complaint, and the letter stopped. Spring came, and with it, renewal in more ways than one. I hired an interior designer and redecorated the entire townhouse. Out went the neutral colors and safe choices Trevor had preferred. In came deep jewel tones, bold artwork, furniture that was comfortable and personal. Instead of trying to impress anyone, I painted the walls colors I loved. I hung photographs of my parents, my family, my friends. I filled the space with plants and books and things that made me happy. The townhouse became truly mine. Not just legally, but spiritually. I reconnected with old friends. Kesha became a regular fixture in my life again, coming over for wine and movies and long conversations. I joined a book club. I started taking yoga classes. I went to therapy to work through the years of emotional abuse, to understand how I'd ended up in that situation, to learn to recognize red flags, to build healthier boundaries. My therapist was a gentle, insightful woman who helped me see that I wasn't weak or stupid for staying as long as I had. That abuse is insidious. Precisely because it happens gradually. That getting out was the bravest thing I'd ever done. At work, I flourished. Without the constant stress and negativity of my home life. I had energy and creativity and focus I hadn't possessed in years. I led successful initiatives. I mentored junior staff members. I built strong relationships with executive leadership. I was promoted again, this time to executive director of human resources. I was making $120,000 a year. I had a corner office. I had a team of 8 people who respected and admired me. I had achieved the professional success I'd always dreamed of. But there was something else nagging at me. A dream I'd pushed aside years ago. Back in college, I'd fantasized about starting my own consulting firm, about being my own boss, about building something from scratch that was entirely mine. The divorce had taught me something important. I was stronger than I thought. I was capable of more than I'd believed, so why not try? I spent months researching, planning, building a business plan. I took evening classes on entrepreneurship and small business management. I worked with other consultants and business owners. I saved aggressively, adding to my already substantial nest egg. And in September, 9 months after I'd kicked Trevor out of my life, I gave notice at my corporate job and launched Bennett Consulting Group. It specialized in leadership development, workplace culture, and HR strategy. I targeted mid-sized companies that needed expertise but couldn't afford a full-time executive-level HR director. My value proposition was simple. I'd give them high-level strategic guidance at a fraction of the cost of a full-time hire. I leveraged every connection I'd made in my years in corporate HR. I reached out to everyone I knew. I put myself out there in a way I'd never dared to before. The first 6 months were terrifying. There were weeks when I wondered if I'd made a huge mistake, if I should have stayed in the safety of corporate employment. But gradually, steadily, the business grew. I landed my first client, a manufacturing company that needed help restructuring their HR department. Then, a second, a tech startup that needed someone to build their people operations from scratch. Then a third and a fourth. By the end of the first year, I had 12 clients and had pulled in $180,000 in revenue. I was profitable. I was successful. I was thriving. In month 18, I hired my first employee, a recent graduate named Taylor, who was smart and eager and reminded me of myself at that age. 6 months later, I hired 2 more people. My small firm was becoming a real business with a real team. I rented office space in a professional building downtown, a bright, modern suite with glass walls and an open floor plan. I had my name on the door, Bennett Consulting Group. Mine. A local business magazine did a feature on rising entrepreneurs in Atlanta and included me. They took my photograph for the article, and I wore my mother's pearl necklace for it, the one she'd always worn to important occasions. Looking at that photo later, I barely recognized myself. This confident, poised, successful woman smiling at the camera. Was that really me? Was that the same woman who had stood in a convenience store parking lot being screamed at and called a slut just 2 years ago? Yes and no. It was me. But it was also a version of me I'd buried for so long, I'd forgotten she existed. The divorce hadn't changed me. It had freed me to become who I'd always been underneath all the criticism and control and diminishment. I even started dating, though I was cautious about it. I'd learned my lessons. I knew the red flags now. I knew what I would and wouldn't tolerate. I went out with a few men, nice men, kind men, but I wasn't in a rush. I wasn't desperate to be partnered again. I was perfectly content on my own. If someone came along who added to my life instead of detracting from it, wonderful. If not, that was fine, too. I didn't need a man to complete me. I was already complete. 2 years after the divorce, I was 40 years old and thriving. My business had grown to 6 employees and was generating solid 6-figure revenue. I had contracts with 15 companies, several of them substantial long-term engagements. I'd paid off all my debts and built up significant savings. I'd traveled to New York, to San Francisco, to Mexico City. Places I'd always wanted to visit but Trevor had never been interested in. I developed deeper friendships, meaningful connections with people who valued me for who I actually was. I'd learned to like myself again, to respect myself, to value my own company. One evening, I was sitting in my home office looking at family photographs I'd arranged on the bookshelf behind my desk. My parents on their wedding day, young and hopeful. My father in his garden holding a tomato he was particularly proud of. My mother at my college graduation, beaming with pride. My sister Simone and me as kids, grinning gap-toothed at the camera. And I thought about the journey, about the girl I'd been, the woman I'd become, the years I'd lost, and the life I'd reclaimed. I thought about standing in that parking lot on New Year's Eve, shaking with fear and rage and determination. I thought about the moment I'd closed the door on Trevor and his family and my old life. I thought about every difficult decision, every scary moment, every time I'd chosen myself when it would have been easier to give in. I did it, I said out loud to the photographs. To my parents, who weren't there to see it, but whom I felt watching over me anyway. I kept my promise. I chose happiness. I chose peace. I chose life. And it was true. I had given Trevor 7 years of my life. 7 years where I'd made myself smaller, quieter, less, trying to fit into the shape he wanted me to be. 7 years of criticism and control and contempt. 7 years of losing pieces of myself until I almost didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. But he hadn't taken everything. He couldn't, because the things that mattered most, my intelligence, my strength, my resilience, my capacity for growth, those were mine. They'd always been mine. They were just buried for a while under the weight of his expectations and his mother's toxicity and my own fear. The divorce hadn't given me those things. It had just cleared away the rubble so I could find them again. I thought about Trevor. Sometimes, though not often and never with longing. I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd moved back to Memphis after the divorce, that he was dating someone new, a younger woman, and I felt a brief flash of pity for her. Would he treat her the way he treated me? Would she be strong enough to leave when the mask slipped and the real Trevor emerged? Or would she stay, making herself smaller and smaller like I had, wasting her precious years on a man who didn't know how to value her? I hoped she'd be smarter than I was. I hoped she'd see the red flags early and run, but I also knew that sometimes we have to learn our lessons the hard way. Sometimes we have to lose ourselves before we can find ourselves. Sometimes the only way out is through. Diane, I'd told anyone who would listen that I was a terrible woman who'd stolen her son's house and destroyed their family. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. I hadn't stolen anything. The house had been mine long before Trevor entered the picture. And I hadn't destroyed the family. They'd done that themselves with their entitlement and their cruelty and their complete inability to see me as a human being deserving of respect. But I didn't waste energy being angry at them anymore. Anger had served its purpose. It had given me the strength to leave, the courage to stand up for myself, the fire to rebuild my life, but holding on to it now would be like drinking poison and expecting someone else to get sick. They were irrelevant to my life now. They were part of my past, not my present or my future. What I focused on instead was gratitude. Gratitude for my parents who had shown me what real love looked like, even if I'd forgotten those lessons for a while. Gratitude for my Aunt Helen, whose inheritance had given me not just a house, but independence, security, the literal foundation on which I'd rebuilt my life. Gratitude for my mother's final gift of money, which had given me options when I needed them most. Gratitude for Kesha, who'd remained my friend even when I disappeared into my marriage and had been there with open arms when I finally emerged. Gratitude for the strength I discovered in myself. Strength I hadn't known I possessed until I was forced to use it. And gratitude, strangely enough, for the experience itself. Not for Trevor or the abuse or the years of unhappiness. I wouldn't wish that on anyone, but for what I'd learned from it, about red flags and boundaries, about self-worth and self-respect, about the difference between compromise and self-erasure, about the importance of financial independence and legal protection, about the courage it takes to walk away from something comfortable but wrong in pursuit of something uncertain but right. I'd become a better consultant because of what I'd lived through. When I sat across from employees dealing with workplace bullies or toxic managers, I understood in a way I couldn't have before. When I advised companies on creating cultures of respect and psychological safety, I spoke from experience. When I coached leaders on the importance of valuing their people, I knew firsthand what happened when people felt devalued. My pain had been transmuted into purpose. On the second anniversary of my divorce, I did something symbolic. I took off my wedding ring. I'd stopped wearing it the day I kicked Trevor out, but I'd kept it in my jewelry box, unable to fully let it go. Now I took it to a jeweler and had the gold melted down and reshaped into a simple, elegant bracelet. Same metal, completely different form. Old life transformed into new life. The jeweler engraved the inside with 3 words, I chose me. I wore that bracelet every day. On days when I had important client meetings and needed to feel powerful. On days when self-doubt crept in and I needed to remember how far I'd come. On days when I felt lonely and needed to remember that being alone was infinitely better than being with someone who made me feel lonely even when I was standing right next to them. My sister Simone noticed the change in me. You're different now, she said during one of our monthly video calls. Lighter. Somehow. Happier. More like the sister I remember from before you got married. I agreed. I'm more myself than I've been in years. We never liked Trevor, you know, Simone admitted. We thought he was a pompous ass, but you seemed happy at first, so we tried to be supportive. We're glad you got out. Me, too, I said simply. Me, too. I established new holiday traditions. New Year's Eve, which had once been a source of trauma, became my personal holiday of reflection and intention setting. I spent it alone by choice, reviewing the past year and planning the next one. I'd make a good dinner, pour good wine, light candles, and write in my journal. At midnight, I'd toast myself to another year of freedom, to another year of growth, to another year of living life on my own terms. I started a tradition of treating myself well. Flowers every week from the farmer's market, just because. Monthly Massages, not as a luxury, but as self-care. Annual solo trips to places I wanted to see. A comfortable chair for reading. Good coffee beans, soft sheets. All the small things that made life more pleasant. Things I denied myself for years because Trevor thought they were wasteful or frivolous or unnecessary. I learned that taking care of myself wasn't selfish. It was essential. You can't pour from an empty cup. And I'd spent years running on empty, giving everything to a marriage that gave nothing back. Now I prioritized filling my own cup first. And the amazing thing was, when my cup was full, I had so much more to offer everyone else, my employees, my clients, my friends, my family, my community. I started volunteering at a local women's shelter, helping women who were leaving abusive relationships navigate the practical challenges of starting over. I helped them understand their legal rights. I reviewed their resumes and coached them for job interviews. I taught financial literacy workshops on budgeting and credit repair and saving. I shared my story, not in graphic detail, but in broad strokes, so they'd know they weren't alone. So they'd know there was life after abuse. So they'd know recovery was possible. One woman, Sarah, reminded me so much of myself. She was in her late 30s, had been married for 12 years to a man who controlled every aspect of her life. She had no money of her own, no career, no independence. She'd finally left after he'd become physically violent, but she was terrified of being alone, terrified of not being able to support herself, terrified of making it on her own. What if I can't do this? She asked me one day, tears streaming down her face. What if I'm not strong enough? I took her hands in mine and looked her in the eyes. You're already strong enough. You left. That took incredible courage. Everything else is just logistics. One day at a time, one step at a time, you'll build a new life. It won't be easy. There will be days when you question everything. But I promise you, on the other side of this fear is freedom, and freedom is worth fighting for. 6 months later, she sent me a photo. She was standing in front of her new apartment, her first place that was truly hers, holding her keys and grinning. The caption said, "I did it. Thank you for showing me it was possible." That's when I knew my pain had purpose. My story mattered, not just to me, but to every woman who needed to know she could survive leaving. She could rebuild. She could thrive. I'd been asked several times to share my full story more publicly, podcasts, blogs, speaking engagements. I'd always declined. Not ready to expose myself that way. Worried about judgment or backlash or Trevor somehow using it against me. But on my 41st birthday, I decided it was time. I recorded this video, this story, everything I'm sharing with you right now, because silence protects abusers. Because shame keeps victims trapped. Because the more we talk about what really happens behind closed doors in so-called respectable marriages, the harder it becomes for people like Trevor and Diane to operate unchecked. Some people won't understand. They'll say I'm bitter or vindictive or airing dirty laundry. They'll say I should have tried harder, compromised more, been more patient. They'll say marriage is hard and everyone has problems and I gave up too easily. To those people, I say, you weren't there. You didn't live it. You don't get to judge it. But for everyone who's been there, who's lived in a relationship where you lost yourself piece by piece, who stood in a parking lot or a bathroom or a closet and thought, I can't do this anymore, who's been afraid to leave because of money or fear or shame or what people will think, this story is for you. You can leave. You can rebuild. You can thrive. It won't be easy. There will be moments of doubt and fear and grief. There will be people who don't understand or who take their side. There will be financial challenges and logistical nightmares and nights when you cry yourself to sleep wondering if you made the right choice. But you did. If you're in a relationship that makes you feel small, that chips away at your self-worth, that requires you to shrink yourself to make someone else comfortable, that feels more like a prison than a partnership, you deserve better. You deserve respect. You deserve kindness. You deserve to be valued for who you actually are, not who someone else wants you to be. And if you can't have that in your marriage, then you deserve to have it in your life, even if that means being alone, especially if that means being alone. Because being alone and at peace is infinitely better than being partnered and miserable. I'm 41 now. I'm single. I'm successful. I own my own home and my own business. I have genuine friendships and a life I've built intentionally. I wake up every morning in my own bed in my own house. And I feel grateful. Grateful for the silence. Grateful for the peace. Grateful for the freedom to be exactly who I am without apology or compromise. Would I have chosen this path if I could go back? Would I have skipped Trevor entirely, avoided that whole chapter of my life? I don't know. Part of me wishes I'd listened to my father's warning. Wishes I'd been brave enough to stay single rather than settling for someone who wasn't right for me. Part of me mourns those 7 lost years and thinks about who I might have been, what I might have accomplished if I hadn't been worn down by that relationship, but part of me recognizes that I needed that experience to become who I am now. I needed to lose myself to learn to fight for myself. I needed to hit bottom to learn I was strong enough to climb back up. I needed to have my worth questioned and my identity challenged so I could figure out for myself what I valued and who I wanted to be. That version of me who married Trevor at 32, she was looking for validation from outside herself. She thought a husband and a wedding ring would make her complete, would prove her worth, would fill some void she felt. She didn't understand yet that no other person can complete you. You have to be whole on your own. You have to know your own worth. You have to validate yourself. This version of me at 41, she knows those things now. She knows her worth isn't determined by whether someone chose her. She knows being alone isn't the same as being lonely. She knows that self-respect isn't selfish. It's essential. She knows that the only person you're guaranteed to spend your entire life with is yourself. So, you'd better make sure you like that person. I look back at that woman standing in the parking lot 2 years ago, shaking with fear and rage and determination, and I want to hug her. I want to tell her it's going to be okay, better than okay. I want to tell her that the fear she feels is temporary, but the freedom she's about to claim is permanent. I want to tell her she's braver than she knows, stronger than she thinks, and capable of more than she can imagine. But she had to walk through that fire herself. Just like anyone in that situation has to walk through it themselves. No one can do it for you. No one can make it easier. You just have to take that first terrifying step and then the next and then the next, and eventually you look back and realize you've walked miles. You've survived. You've made it to the other side. So this is my story. This is how I went from being a woman who was called a slut by her husband in a grocery store parking lot on New Year's Eve to being a woman who owns her own home, runs her own business, and lives life entirely on her own terms. This is how I went from surviving to thriving. This is how I chose myself. And if you're watching this and you're in a situation like I was, wondering if you're strong enough to leave, wondering if you can make it on your own, wondering if it's worth the risk and the fear and the uncertainty, let me tell you something. You are strong enough. You can make it, and it is absolutely unequivocally worth it. Your life is precious. Your peace matters. Your happiness is important. You deserve to live in a home that feels like a sanctuary, not a battlefield. You deserve a partner who lifts you up, not one who tears you down. You deserve respect and kindness and genuine love. And if you don't have those things, you deserve to walk away and build a life where you do. It took me 7 years to learn that lesson. 7 years of making myself smaller, of accepting less than I deserved, of hoping things would change when deep down I knew they never would. 7 years of giving Trevor and his family power over my happiness, my self-worth, my very identity. But I got those 7 years back. Not the time itself, that's gone forever. But I got myself back. The woman I was before. Trevor, the woman I was always meant to be, the woman I am now. And that woman, she's pretty damn amazing. She's built a business from scratch. She's helped other women escape abuse. She's traveled and grown and learned and thrived. She's happy. Genuinely, deeply, peacefully happy, and you can be, too. Whatever your situation is, whatever feels impossible right now, I promise you it's not. One step at a time, one day at a time, one brave decision followed by another. That's how you reclaim your life. That's how you choose yourself. The groceries are still in the car. Metaphorically speaking, the demands are still being made. The insults are still being hurled. The family is still waiting for you to submit and serve and shrink yourself down to nothing. But you don't have to get those groceries. You don't have to meet those demands. You don't have to accept those insults. You don't have to shrink. You can stand in your own entryway, in your own home, in your own life, and say, no, no more. I'm done. You can close the door on people who don't respect you and open windows to people who do. You can cry on your floor and then stand back up. You can watch the fireworks at midnight and toast yourself. You can wake up on New Year's Day in your own bed and feel peace for the first time in years. You can do all of that. I know because I did it. And if I can, you can. So, here's to everyone who's ever felt trapped in their own life. Here's to everyone who's ever been called names by someone who promised to love them. Here's to everyone who's ever made themselves smaller to make someone else comfortable. Here's to everyone who stayed too long because leaving felt impossible. And here's to everyone who's finally found the courage to walk away, to close the door, to choose themselves, to reclaim their lives, to build something new from the ashes of what was. You're stronger than you know. You're braver than you think. You're worthy of more than you're accepting, and your best life is waiting for you on the other side of that fear. All you have to do is take the first step. I'm really glad you stayed until the end of my story. If it resonated with you, if it helped you in any way, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. I share new stories every single day. Stories of survival and strength and people who refuse to give up on themselves. Leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from and what time it is. I love knowing that this story is reaching people all over the world, that maybe somewhere right now someone is hearing exactly what they need to hear at exactly the moment they need to hear it. If you want to support this channel, if these stories mean something to you, there's a donation link below. Every bit helps me continue creating content that matters, content that might just change someone's life the way my life was changed by finally finding the courage to choose myself. And now 2 of my most popular stories are going to appear on your screen. Choose whichever one calls to you. Every story here has a message. Every story here matters. And every person watching this matters too, including you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being brave enough to consider that you might deserve better. Because you do.